I'm Andrew Renwick, and I'm overwhelmed by how many people we've managed to, through one or two strategically placed people that I said we were going to have this evening, to how many people have come and shown up this evening. Absolutely overwhelmed. It's the event that seems to just get bigger and bigger. We put out 40 chairs, and I think we've twice that, so it's absolutely fantastic. And I'm very privileged to know so many people that have invited friends and people of interest. I've heard this talk some time ago in Mosborough by John, and I thought, although he tried very hard to make it connect with Mosborough, I thought this would definitely be put out in Ridgeway. It just shows how much interest we've got here. We've got people from Abbeydale Industrial Hamlet, we've got the chairman of the British Artistic Blacksmiths Association here, we've got the Moss Valley Wildlife Group here, we've got the president of Sheffield Industrial History Society, we've an eminent architect, and we've a number of blacksmiths, and the great and the good of the village. And I just want to sort of, in this little introduction before I come on to John, who's the main feature of the evening, set the scene. You've seen perhaps the footage of the First World War revamped by Peter Jackson recently on the television, and how touchable those images were of the men 100 years ago. Tonight's talk is about 200 years ago plus in this area of endeavour as people that made a living as metal workers in a valley, in the Moss Valley. And I want to just sort of try, it's very apt, we're in the church here, which is 1820, I think, built, and the tower perhaps 1840. It's very apt that we're here with the Hutton Monument outside by the main gates, it's an ideal location. So John Bennett is the main feature of the evening, but after his little bit, we've got a man here, Joe Moore, who may give us a bit of a demonstration on scything. We've got a musical, a musical finish with Jim Geddy, who's come off his UK tour with Toby to play some music which is inspired by his knowledge and love of the Moss Valley. We have a little bit of an exhibition of some bits and pieces at the back. And we've got a tea and coffee arrangement for donations to the church. This is not a paid-for event, so we're hoping that for tea and coffee, which these beautiful women behind the screen, one of which is my wife and mother-in-law, we're hoping that if you feel you've had a great evening, donations will go directly to St John's Church. And then after that, if we're all still talking to each other, we are some debate whether we're to go to the Swan or to the Queen's Head. The Queen's Head has a connection with Ridgeway and Scythe and Street, but we're going to go to the Swan, largely because Sally, the lady, is here. I have a here, let me just give a couple of points of safety. If I have to do this, I think, if there's a fire, we can go out the door you came in, or there's an emergency exit to this side here on your left, sort of barge it open. And perhaps we should have an assembly point, I think that's what's normally said, which perhaps could be by the gates, in case we lock somebody in, which can happen at events like this. Perhaps if somebody's in the loo and they didn't realise there was a fire. And there are some toilets in the back, and that's the sort of general announcements. But I asked John then, Mr. John Bennett here, for a few words to be able to introduce him with, and he sent me a screed here and said, just choose one or two. They're all so fascinating that I want to give you the whole lot. Just quickly, so John here was born in 1944 and was brought up very close here at Westview, which is number 20, the moor next to the churchyard, in fact, the house just up the hill. His father was a headmaster of Ridgeway School in the late 1930s. He lived in the schoolhouse at that time and moved to Westview during the war. He's an older brother. He has an older brother, Jeff, who's a good friend of Frank Fisher. That name means a lot to people here. His fond memories of roaming the fields, farms, and woods of Ridgeway as a lad. He attended Sunday school at St John's, member of the church choir for many years, not because of any singing ability. Member of the youth club PCC, Ridgeway Church Entertainment Committee. Married to Margaret, whose family ancestors in Ridgeway go back 300 years, including Sicklesmiths, farmers, and the Methodist chapel preacher. His first proper job at the age of 15 was 10 hours of potato picking at Bradley's farm. Probably, he says, what encouraged him to follow an academic career. Most of his career was in electronic engineering at Sheffield University, specialising in radar imaging systems for the Earth, and usually found in the Swan on the first Friday of the month. And his favourite is chicken and mushroom pie. So, without further ado, thank you so much for coming, and can I hand over to John Bennett. Thank you so much. Hot love with these ones.
Yeah, can we go anything to the first? Thank you, Andrew, for that. One or two things I must forget to mention before I start. Clearly thanking Andrew for inviting me here tonight, but also Andrew and Caroline, the rest of the beautiful ladies I understand are in the kitchen, and Peter for organising the evening itself. And it's not just all about the Ridgeway website, which is what I'm involved with, because I need to acknowledge all the work that's being done by Janet and Anne through Village in Bloom on Ridgeway history. Apparently the increasing history storage space means they'll probably be homeless by Christmas. It is a great effort they've been involved with over the years, and I do want to acknowledge all their work. We tend to complement each other. The website tends to pick up people who are away from Ridgeway, and we found out about a lot of expats and their involvement with Ridgeway in this way. Okay, well, the next thing I want to say is I'm not an expert. I know there are experts in the audience, which starts to worry me now, but I'm just very interested in this subject. And what I want to do tonight is to talk about the Ridgeway scythe and sickle industry. And it won't be the complete scythe and sickle industry, because that will take too long. There's been an awful lot going on over the past few hundred years. And what I want to do is to concentrate eventually on two manufactories, that of Birley and the Phoenix Works. Inevitably, that means we'll also learn a little bit about the Hutton family, because they were so closely involved in all that work. I want to cover the origins of the industry to some extent. I want to talk about the tools again to some extent, and mention the dams and the wheels that are spread across the valley. And finally to talk about the development of Birley and the Phoenix Works. Well, these chaps we've got up here tonight, they're why we're here tonight. This is a typical village scene from the past few hundred years. This particular scene has got, in the centre here, Hugh Barker, and Hugh used to work at Fox's Common Side Works. So I'm pretty certain this photograph is Fox's Common Side Works, probably around 1900. Okay, so let's find out a bit more. First thing I want to do is look at the area of interest. And you'll probably recognise this, but here's Ridgeway, here's Mosborough, here's Eckington, Ford, and Troy. And the question which we should ask now is, why here? Why is it this area produced such a thriving industry of scythe and sickle manufacturing? And one way of understanding why is to remove all the woods and the trees and the fields and see what we're left with. And when you do that, you find that we've got a fairly complex waterway system. There's a main river down here, which of course is the River Moss, and a lot of brooks and streams feeding into that river. And it's pretty obvious when you start looking a little bit further that we've got dams which are being produced along this waterway. And the River Moss then, and its brooks, became a very attractive source of power for water wheels. Very important to have this source of power when you're producing things like scythes and sickles in great quantity. The more available power you have, the more you can produce. Sorry, would you like to come through? Please. I think are there any spare seats? There are some, sure, some spare seats. There's one here. Have we any other spare seats?
One at the back.
Oh, there's one or two down the back there. That's okay. So the River Moss and its brooks, very attractive source of power for water wheels. And what I want to do now, before we go any further, is just go back to origins a little bit. A bit of early history, we're actually going back to the time of the Black Death. And at the time of the Black Death, 1350, there was a grindstone down at Ford. It was probably used for making swords. Even though it was probably known as a cutlery wheel, the thing it produced was more aggressive than knives and forks. And later in that century, it's known that there was iron smelting about half a mile down the river from Ford itself. So evidence of iron in the ground, and if we look at this picture here, which is of the Scythe Dam at Ford, the colour of that water shows very clearly that there are heavy deposits of iron around. This particular dam, Scythe means a drain, is fed as a result of water leaching down through the ground into that dam. Well, back in the 1400s and 1500s, what happened was there was this keenness to actually make things with smithies, and charcoal was needed, and the woodlands were felled. And the consequence of that is there was a lot more arable land appearing. Because they had arable land, we could now have crops like wheat and barley and rye. And once you've got crops, you need some reaping tools, and you need corn mills. And this is happening not only locally, but on a national basis. So there's a need for an industry, and the industry develops. It develops in Troy, a very large centre at first, Marsh Lane, Mosborough, Ridgeway and Ford. And I come back to this again, it's the ability to dam those brooks and rivers which enable this to happen. So what we perhaps should do now is ask what are the tools we're talking about? The first of these is the scythe, and the scythe has a few characteristic components, and I believe it also has several more. But the main one's obviously the blade, the handle, the main handle known as, I think, the snath or the snake, and the bit you hold onto there, the doles. Although I think, as I've said, there's a family of names that can be associated with this. Then we have the sickle, and it's said that the true sickle has a serrated edge. So you can see the serrations probably on the bottom of that blade there. And this means that the sickle is really used with a sowing action. It's used for hollow stem growth like rice and maize, where if you try to do it, cut it any other way, it tends to just bend the crop over. So the sickle very useful for that. And the third type of tool, the hook, has no serrations, and is probably used for grass and that sort of thing. Okay, well, leads us to the question, how do you use a scythe? I already know there's a recognition process going in the audience here. You've seen him before, and it's rumoured that he wasn't very good at using the scythe. So what I've got is a short video here, which shows the scythe being used. Now, later on, Joe's going to tell us a bit more about how you really do all this, but it's useful to see people actually doing this. And I chose this as an example of good technique, not because I know anything about scything, but anybody who works barefoot and can still stand up afterwards must have a pretty good idea of what they're actually doing. So these guys are showing the action quite effectively there. But if your technique's no good, you've got to find some other way of diverting people's attention. Some of you recognise Mr. Clark from the 1960s. He's there outside this church, and Mr. Clark doesn't need to take his shirt off to use a side problem. In fact, Mr. Clark was responsible for keeping the grass in this churchyard very low for many years, and he was very effective at doing that. Well, in addition, wood turners are also important. They're there to produce the handles and the dowels and so on. This is a pole lathe where the man himself is operating the treadle to keep the thing going. And this was in action until certainly the end of the 19th century. And if you read Willis Fox's book, you can see in there's a comment about Mrs. Marsh of Haven, when she was younger, probably in the 1800s, spent many hours in a room near to the post office, just pedalling and pedalling and pedalling for the man who was making sickle blades. So, sickle the handle, sorry. So, the need for power is again seen here. Power that doesn't involve human beings. So, the area becomes a hive of activity. There are smithies all over the place. And in each of these, there are people making sickles, so that it begs the question, how do you make a sickle? Well, apparently, what you do first is have the ability to get up early in the morning. The smith and his striker start at 4 AM to produce enough moods for the day. So what's a mood? It's what you're in when you've got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I suppose. But it's actually an iron bar, anything from 8 to 18 inches long, depending upon the size of sickle you're going to make. It's then going to be forge welded to a thinner and shorter length of steel. I want to talk about a little bit about, or show a demonstration video of forge welding shortly. But forge welding is a process where you combine two pieces of metal together by raising the temperature of them first and then hammering them to connect them together. Then it's got to be shaped, or smithed into a shape, as I say there, and you need a little bend bit on the end of the tang in order to fit into the handle. Then it's ground and tedded. And this word tedded means it's going to have a lot of serrations put in, the serrations which we talked about earlier, which are characteristic of a sickle. And there are 50 or 60 of these being applied to the sickle per minute by hand, so it's a pretty professional process. You've got to be pretty good to do this properly. And this tedding process, I'll talk again later a little bit more about. Then it's hardened, probably with a bass of whale oil or something like that. I'm not expert in this. And given a final grinding. Still more processes. You put the handle on. You've then got to varnish it, the handle. You've got to oil the sickle itself. And the last thing you do is wrap it in straw rope. And the straw rope is probably made at Ford. Can be at Mosborough as well, but there was a rope making process being carried out down at Ford. So, forge welding. This is a little example of how forge welding is carried out. There are two pieces of metal which are being placed together and then hammered in such a way that afterwards you'll see it's almost like one continuous piece of metal. So there we are. To me that looks good. Whether you experts will do that. Well, very often the forge was not near to the grinding area, the area where the grinding took place. And you needed to be able to transport the sickles between these two places. And pack horse, donkey, these were the sort of things used for transport. And some of you, I'm sure, will know all about this, but In Ridgeway, there was a fellow called John Haslam who had his workshops behind Ridgeway Post Office, and he ground his sickles down at Neverfear Dam. So that's a fair distance away. And what he used to do was to load up his pack mule, I think it's called in the books, with sickles for grinding. He'd then just take it out onto the road outside the post office and send it on its way down towards Neverfear via Claywheel Lane. And when you look at it, it's got quite a challenge. It's starting up here, and it's got to finish up down here. So let's see, hopefully some of you will see the yellow arrows. He's starting off now, moving down the road. He comes down the moor, and then has to remember to turn left on Plumley Lane, comes along Plumley Lane, and then has to eventually turn right to finish up down at Neverfear here. And then when he got there, he was unloaded, and the freshly ground sickles were put on, and he was sent back again. So, a very efficient process. Well, Caleb Island's got a fine display of John Haslam's work. And this is it, I photograph it on the wall. And this is a close-up of the label, which says John Haslam and Sons, Reaping Hook Manufactories, Scythe, Sickle and Reaping Hook Manufactories, Ridgeway near Sheffield. And in that display cabinet, there are sickles and hooks destined for Africa, Canada, Holland, America, Ireland, Portugal and Spain. And if you look up close at these, you can see they've all been beautifully engraved with their destinations. And one in the middle, the two in the middle rather, have got the words elastic sickle on them. And we were rather puzzled about what this actually meant. We didn't think it was going to wobble all over the place or something like that. And the best we've done, Peter, thanks to Peter for this, is to find a reference which says that when you're making steel, there is a situation where you can combine the iron and the carbon in an elastic state. And this, I've read since, results in a type of steel which is very hard and used for things like surgeons' instruments, for sculptors' chisels, and so on. And I think it's Benjamin Huntsman who actually invented the process in Attercliffe. But you guys out there, I'm sure, will tell me the truth on that. Okay, a little bit about dams and wheels. If we look at our map again, we'll see we've got an array of dams here, each having its associated wheel. And the highest one is over here on the left, Top Scalper. That dam is fed from Troy, from a river, from streams in Troy. Top Scalper feeds into Bottom Scalper, and Bottom Scalper doesn't feed into Birley Hay, but produces a stream which joins the main boss, which goes through Forward, past Forward down, past Scythe down, down past Neverfear here. Birley Hay has its own supply from further up the valley. Each of the wheels at these places, Scalper wheel takes the top prize for size. Scalper wheel was 40 feet in diameter. I was standing here waiting for us to start tonight and looking at the height of this room. And I think it's just over 20 feet to the ceiling. So the Scalper wheel was twice as high as this room, an enormous piece of kit. Birley Hay wheels, a bit smaller, two of those. Fox's wheel at Forward down, smaller. Scythe wheel pretty big, 30 feet in diameter, and Neverfear wheel was 20 feet. This is a photograph of the pit associated with Scalper wheel, the big 40-foot wheel. You can see the people, oops, sorry about that. You can see the people up here, which they're probably looking into Top Scalper, and that gives you a scale for the size of this, an enormous wheel. And you think, oh, that's good, an enormous wheel, that must be pretty good, that must be a lot better than my car producing horsepower. But if you do the sums, and you can by getting to the appropriate app on the internet, a 40-foot diameter wheel, taking 500 gallons a minute, which is probably a fair flow of water, produces 4 horsepower. So even though they were enormous, they weren't necessarily great producers of power, which is why as time went by, steam took over. And of course, steam was more attractive because you could put it next to where you were making your stuff as well. Well, here's Fox's Wheel down at the far end. Not sure exactly when this photograph was taken. Probably a similar time to the other one. We don't know who these people are. My wife would be delighted to know who they are because one of them is probably great-granddad Henry Fox. But again, just like today, nobody writes on the back of the photograph, so we don't really know. Right, let's make a start now in looking at Birley and the Phoenix Works. And before I do, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. First of all, Willis Fox for his magnificent book on Ridgeway Village and its industries. To Frank Fisher, who has a superb set of historical records, which he's collected over the years, and they're a superb read, photographs and documents. Tony Rippon is the person who got in touch with me several years ago and asked if he could write an article for the website on the Phoenix Works. And of course I was delighted. Tony's father and grandfather were works managers at the Phoenix Works. And Keith Renshaw, again Keith wrote an article, and this article was about Birley Hay. And we'll see some of Keith's lovely drawings of Birley Hay shortly. Bit of background. I said we needed to talk about buttons. Buttons start to come into the scene around while we're talking about notable national events which involve illness, then I should say, around about the time of the Plague of Eden, Richard Hutton was born, and he was apprenticed to Tom Staniforth on Sloane Lane as a sicklesmith. So he's the first sicklesmith of the Hutton line. And he had a son, Joseph, and we've got a horrible pattern developing now because the Huttons have this habit of calling their sons Joseph. So we've got to start numbering them. So we've got Joseph 1 here, and Joseph 2. And Joseph 2 was probably the first person to make an impact locally and over a large area in Sheffield of being known for being a sickle maker. And as we go further down the line, we get Joseph 3. And Joseph 3 has a brother called Ezra, who he's in partnership with. And Ezra is the guy who built the Lion House, which everybody will know. Many people will know. And I understand that Ezra has, I can't remember which window it is. I think it's this window where Ezra's desk is still there. When I went to see Lawrence Martin, who was there, he showed me all this. And Ezra used to sit behind there and pay his workers when they came along the road for their pay. And Joseph and Ezra have their workshops at the Palais Royal, which is now the Queen's Head. And you'll see from this photograph, we've got Ridgeway School here, and across the road is the Queen's Head, often known as the Palace to some people, because presumably a Palais Royal. And if you go in closer and look at the end of that building, you can see this area here where it's been bricked up. And that's the loading bay of the warehouse that was used in the old days. Well, Joseph III adopted his nephew, Joseph IV. So it's getting more difficult now because Joseph IV wasn't his son, but he was still called Joseph. But if you bear with me, we'll get there. And Joseph IV was set up by Joseph III in the Palais Royal by 1815. And again, if you look at the Queen's Head and you look down this side of the building and you see that yellow arrow there which is pointing to that part of the wall, if you zoom in on there, you can see there's a plaque which says Palais Royal 1815, and that's the time of Joseph IV. Joseph IV, worth saying a few words about, the old blade. I don't have time to talk about him in detail, but he was ingenious and he was cantankerous. So there's a nice combination of characteristics which lead to the fact he had a dispute with his workforce over prices. He sold his business, and he toured the world with Percy, his faithful dog. And it gets better because Percy rescued him from a shipwreck. And this completely polarised Joseph IV because he turned devoutly religious and came back and built a house called St. Cross in the form of a crucifix. This is the 1856 map, which shows Sloane Lane, shows St. Cross here. The interesting thing about that picture is that St. Cross is not accessed on Sloane Lane. It's accessed from the main road here, just below the chapel, and that was the way into St. Cross there. Just bear with me a second. Just to move to this second page, which hopefully won't be, but just in case. Okay. So this is a view of those gates, of that entrance here. You can see the curvature on here. This is the original entrance to St. Cross. And they say there are evenings when the ghostly apparition of Joseph IV's wheelie bin appears. And then it disappears the next day. So, think about that. Okay, well, the story of Joseph IV was reenacted in a local production in 2002 known as The Blade and the Cross. And the presentation took place in the grounds of St. Cross. Now, I don't want you to read all that because you won't be able to see it, but there's a cast of thousands associated with this production, and a lot of these people, you'll recognise their names and so on. And down at the bottom is a special contributor, a poem written and read by Brian Leach called Old Percy's Tale. And we may hear more of that later on. There's the massive production team, and there was a big exhibition as well. For more details, talk to Andrew. He was very involved with that. Anyway, meanwhile, Ezra's sons, Thomas and Joseph V, become partners. We're getting a little bit closer to the Phoenix now, because in 1821 they started the Phoenix Works as T&J Cotton. So that's where it all starts to happen. And the reason why it was a good thing to do is because of production. I think I mentioned on the previous slide here, business expands. Well, in 1794, Palais Royal was producing 8,400 items per year. In 1822, Phoenix Works was producing 50,500. In 1825, Phoenix Works was producing 102,000 items. So it was a good move to have gone to Phoenix Works. The workforce strength is 33 plus 7 grinders. And so the move's taken place from down here, where Palais Royal was, up to here, which is Phoenix Works. The old map shows the situation, no estate there, and we're down here going to up there. And if you go there today, you'll see this plaque on the wall, a plaque which says T&J Hutton. Excuse me, I'm just going to switch my microphone off while I blow my nose. It's coming with that. Okay, fine. Yeah, so there's the plan. And also available to us through Tony Rippon, who wrote the website article, is the wages book. The wages book for 1828 to 1831. And it's next to the candlestick that was used as a source of lighting in the Phoenix Works office. And if you look at the page of the wages book, you won't be able to see the detail here, but wages seem to have been paid fortnightly. And if you zoom in, there are a lot of well-known names in here. There is a Fisher there, a Barker there, a Savage, a Fox, and Webster further down. All those names which we still know today. And extracts from the wages book are this sort of thing. There's a payment here to the Never Fear grinders, £1.09. clearly Netherfield was still being used for grinding by the Phoenix workers. Some of the entries cover two family members, showing that mother and daughter are working at Phoenix Works. Sarah Godley and daughter are being paid £4 and 7p. George Rippon and his mother are getting £1.11 and 6p. The difference, I don't know why. Some payments cover work elsewhere. We've got Martha Booth. She's done 9 3/4 days harvesting at £1 a day, which I'm sure you'll know is 9 and 9p. So that is an entry which is probably representative of the fact that during the summer, sicklesmiths didn't necessarily carry on making sickles. They went off and became farmed in the fields and so on. So probably a link there, but why it's appearing on the Phoenix Worked Wages book, I'm not sure. So, what happened was, things got so good that there was a big demand, an unprecedented demand for scythe blades. And the reason, as a result of this, Thomas, who was the son of Ezra, looked at Birley hay and said, right, this is a great chance for us to actually increase our production of scythe blades by converting Birley hay to scythe forge. And it became the only water-powered forge in the Moss Valley, where scythes were forged under tilt hammers. And it was probably the most important of the 10 or so water-wheel-driven grinding mills in the area. It was operated for just over 100 years, first by the Fisher brothers, the 5 Fisher brothers who came from Little London Works in Sheffield to operate the Birley hay works. And then John Stones, whose father I think was connected with the scalpel wheel, he had it for a time. And then we're back to the Fishers, to James Fisher, who operated it, and then his son, Francis D. Fisher, was the last person to operate the wheel. Francis D. Fisher's son is James, and James Fisher's son is Frank. So there's the connection through, and of course James worked at the Phoenix Works as well. So there's a long pedigree of Scythe and Sickle workers associated with the Fisher family. Location of Birley hay, here we are, down here, just off the Central Ford. And this map shows a little bit more detail. This stream coming down here from Bottom Scalper doesn't go into Birley hay, it goes down the valley. Here's the works at Birley hay, 1856, and there's a weir just there, and some of you have seen this many times, you walk past. This is an old photograph of the stepped wheel at Birley hay. Well, I'm going into a little bit more detail in a second, zoom-wise. Please come in. This is one of Keith Renshaw's drawings of Birley hay, and what it shows, even though you won't see it at the back, is that there's a forgeman's cottage here. There are 3 smithies, there's the forge itself, and a series of mechanical devices in the forge. So let's try to get in a little bit more on the action. The dam is above the picture here, feeds water via a pen trough into this section here. And some of that water goes across to this undershot water wheel here, and the purpose of that is to drive through gearing and a belt this number 18, which is a fan. And that fan is used for all the furnaces in the works. So that's what part of the water is used for. The rest of the water falls in overshot fashion onto this main wheel here, and that wheel drives through reduction gearing and a large flywheel. It drives this main hexagonal shaft on which there are 2 wheeled devices, wheels with cams on. And you'll notice that there are more cams on this wheel than there are on that. So when that's doing its thing, it's doing it a lot faster. And what it's doing is operating these 2 tilt hammers. And what I'd like to do now is to try to explain what's going on with a tilt hammer. The tilt hammer essentially is a large oak trunk, about 12 feet long. It's pivoted asymmetrically, more of it on this side. It has a forging head, which is replaceable for different jobs, which is over an anvil here, which again can be modified. And this is the wheel driven by the cast iron shaft. So what happens is that as the water turns the main wheel, we get the gearing, transmitting the power, stabilised by the flywheel, turning this hexagonal shaft, which turns into two wheels here, which have the cams on. And the next picture shows that when that wheel rotates, these cams will lift the back of the tilt hammer so far, and then allow it to drop onto the job that's being worked on here. So this is the process that's being carried out. We'll see a movie of this shortly to see what's going on. The anvil itself sits on a bed of heather. And the reason for the bed of heather is to avoid paralysis. Because just like when you play cricket, if you don't have a three-springer, you tend to notice it. This is the same for the user of the tilt hammer. This cushions the impact and probably does a better job on the job because of the presence of this heather. Now, if you talk to a Sheffield operator of a tilt hammer, he'd say, oh, you can't be doing that. What you should be using there is horse manure, because that's the only way you'll avoid paralysis. Well, we've got the Ridgeway Birley men to thank for the fact that they discovered you could use heather, which was a much more user-friendly solution to the problem. So that's the way the thing's working. And what I'm going to do now is show a movie of the tilt hammer gearing system at Abbeydale, so you can get a feel for what's happening when it's moving. I don't think it's quite the same gearing system, but most of it is the same. And the tilt hammers won't be actually working themselves, but you'll see some of the salient parts moving. First we've got the water wheel, which is outside, and then we go inside and we see how this is being used to drive the rest of the system. Main wheel here, there's the shaft with the wheels and the cams. You can see some cams there, we'll look at them better in a second. The two tilt hammers are stationary, not connected up. So there's one of the wheels. Here's the second one, it's moving faster. Well, I say it's not moving faster, but there are more cams per second on that. And here's the shear, which is used for cutting the jump. And so as a result of this here tilt hammer will operate faster than the next one. This is something like 120 per minute, and the other's about 60 odd per minute. Okay. The other thing we ought to have as well is a tilt hammer demonstration to give us a feel for what it's really like. watching that for about 2 minutes, so imagine what it's like for 8 hours, I guess. And as Tom Fiddler, who was born in Ridgeway, said, the noise from the Birley hay tilt hammer could be plainly heard in Eckington, 3 miles away. Keith Renshaw, born in Forgeman's Cottage, were I able to recall my first sounds at the moment of my birth, they would have included, above all, the steady thump, thump, thump of a tilt hammer in the forge some 20 yards away. Francis D. Fisher, who worked Ridgeway hay Forge at the end, after listening in my infant years to the water jug dancing in the wash bowl in my bedroom to each vibrating thud of the plating hammer. And that's what it was like, and I know that people have said, be up the village here and you knew it was happening down there. Okay, well, what they did to produce the scythe was to start it again with strips of steel. And these were heated and forge welded under the faster hammer. Again, we produced this thing called a mood, and that's cut in half by shears. Something I didn't realise, and I was talking to Andrew about earlier today, and we'll see it on the movie shortly, is that the process of cutting the thing in half is not based on distance, but on weight. And the steel, which is about to be cut, is balanced so that you've got an equal weight either side, and then the cut is made at that point. Clearly, this is the sensible way to do it, because if you're starting off with a piece of material which is much wider at this end than this end, then cutting it halfway doesn't give you an equal amount of material on either side, which is what you need for the next process. So it gets reheated and forged again to be in the shape of the side plate. Further reheating and forging under the smaller hammer produces this scalp, and that obviously has a link to the top scalper and bottom scalper. Well, what I've got here is a very similar process to the Birley hay process, which took place at the Claywheel Forge in 1941. It's not a very clear film, but it does go through the various stages, and hopefully will help us to understand what's going on. So they're using more pieces of metal now in this process than was used in early days. See how much longer it gets, very quickly. See how much longer the ash on his cigarette gets as well at the same time. And how he sits on the swinging device, what's it called, which is an easier way of doing the job. This is the stage where we're cutting the thing in half, waving first, balancing it first. And the shears here on the left. It's now starting to look more like the side plate. the amount of effort needed to do this. The final stage, grinding, produces a lovely shiny blade. In a second we'll see that. There we go. Down in Birley, this is what happened. The forgeman, Fred Whittaker, Len Nicholson, got work on the Birley hay tilt hammers. There's a side blade under this hammer. Health and safety, Keith Renshaw. My clear recollection is, as a child of perhaps 5 years of age, sitting on Fred Whittaker's knee as he forged a red-hot piece of iron into a hay knife. Well, Huttons were very involved with a lot of exhibitions and trade fairs. They were at the Great Exhibition in 1851. They were at Dublin and Wembley. They were all over the world at Sydney, Cape Town and Rio de Janeiro. And this is a display case of some of the items produced at the Phoenix Works. Here's a photograph, a grand photograph, of the workforce sometime in this period in the late 1800s. And if we zoom in, you can see there's a variety of different people here, but clearly the man with the biggest hat is here at the top of the steps. And this is the plaque which we saw the photograph of earlier on. And on the right of the photograph you can see children, ladies, as well. Every member of the family is taking place. They're taking part in the production. Okay, I want to say a few words about tedding. This is the process of putting the serrations on. And this photograph here shows Charles Bowles over in Ridgeway tedding a sickle. And you can see he's using a very special shaped hammer here. And it's rather similar to a file cutting hammer. The file cutters were very active, of course, mainly in Sheffield, and file cutting was carried out at all times by lots of different people. It was normal for a mother at home to have a file cutting hammer and a set of files, and while the kids were playing out in the yard, she'd sit there in the kitchen and do a few more cuttings of files. If you go down to Kelham Island, you can see this photograph of a file cutter's hammer. And you can see on that there is some evidence of wear. And if you look at the photograph on the side, you can see indeed there is a lot of evidence of wear. This is what happens. I know that Peter was saying to me that when he was at Phoenix Works, I think during school holidays working there, he'd pick up tools which were worn, so worn his thumbs fitted into the thumbs of those people who have been using that tool for so many decades. Grinding is something I must mention. Grinding is a horrible activity. This is a device used for grinding. There's a grinding wheel here. I think it's called a horsing because you sit on that part facing in this direction and lean over, and you carry out the grinding process as these two people are here. There's a lot of mess associated with it and a lot of danger. I think if you saw the BBC programme the other week about which involved Abbeydale, where they were making the scythe, there was a comment on there that when somebody started grinding at 8 years old, the chances were they'd be dead by 19. Because the silicosis process was starting, it only took a few weeks to start becoming active. And there were other problems as well. Here we are, another accident at a grinding wheel. On Saturday afternoon, while George Barker, a young man in the employment of Mr. Hutton, Phoenix Works Ridgeway, was grinding hooks at the Birley Wall nether wheel, the stone which he was using unfortunately broke and went with great force through the roof of the building, breaking a strong beam of wood in its progress. The stone missed Barker, but the hook he was grinding struck against his face with great violence, dividing his nose, knocking out his front teeth, cutting dreadful gashes in other parts of his face, and also depriving him of his eyesight. Messrs. Aspen surgeons of Eckington have rendered the poor fellow every assistance since the unfortunate occurrence, and although he still lies in great danger, hopes are entertained of his recovery. 1840. So that's what grinding was all about. And in fact, Ernest Kay, who ran the Phoenix pub, I recall that Ernest Kay had a grinding accident at Phoenix Works. And I don't know this is true, but I think that Mr. Hutton at the time actually set him up in the Phoenix pub as a compensation for that accident. Well, steam power came along in 1885 from the Phoenix. This is starting to reduce the use of water wheels. It's so convenient and much more powerful. And fortunately, there's a coal mine across the road from the Phoenix Works. New technology demands insurance. Here's a letter from the engine, boiler and employers liability insurance company to Mr. Hutton, sent to him on Christmas Eve 1896. It says, gentlemen, on the 21st, one of our inspectors attended and made an examination of your number 1 boiler whilst it was at rest. The boiler, so far as could be seen, is reported to be in a satisfactory condition. The safety valve and pressure gauge were not attached. Water gauge, check valve and blow-off tap in order. Although we're willing, as already stated, to insure the boiler for a working pressure of 70 pounds, I ought to point out that its flue, being made of plates only 3/8 of an inch thick, is hardly up to the proper standard of pressure. I think we got away with it. Okay, so we're moving in this direction. Sales are increasing, further extensions to building demand rises during World War I, bit of a fall in trade, as probably was nationally anyway. 1927, J.J. Hutton dies. He'd done so much for the firm, he'd done so much for the village, and his son took over. John Jermyn Hutton had a funeral in this church, in this very place where we are. There were 600 seats in the church at that time, and every one of them was full. There were 200 people standing at the back there. There were 250 people outside. It was well recognised that he made a major contribution to Ridgeway. His son, Joseph Gilbert Jermyn, implements his father's improvements, takes over Thomas Balzor in Bosborough, replaces steam power by oil power. But there was leisure time, and the company manager of the Phoenix Works, Mr. Walter Riffin, he used to invite members of the Phoenix workforce to come to his house to listen to radio commentaries of football matches on one of the few radio sets in the village. And this was actually in the Lionhouse where he was living. It was, I think, split in those days. And here we have Match of the Day. If you look bottom left, you can see down here a little football pitch. And that little football pitch was there to reference everybody to where the ball was. As you may know, in those days, and we're talking about 1927 now, the Radio Times would publish the game involved. It would also give you this plan with numbered squares, and when the commentator was commentating the game, there'd be another chap next to him shouting, "Square 2!" and so on. And the interesting thing is that the game they are probably listening to is Arsenal versus Sheffield United, because I think that was just about the first one that was broadcast in this way. So obviously a game of great interest as far as Ridgeway was concerned. I think Arsenal won, but I don't say that. I'm not sure. The guy who tended to do a lot of this commentating was Henry Blythe Thornhill Wakelam, who had just the name for a BBC member of staff. And I've got here, all I could find was a rugby commentary he did between Wales and England. And if you listen to this, there's a couple of times you can hear the squares being called out. It's a bit confusing. But anyway, here we go.
They're off again. They're changing over. Wales has kicked this time. Birley take here. He's kicking to the left. Wales defending the south edge now. Square left. There he goes. A long one. 7 squash. He's made a mark inside his 25 over the time of the bar. Same local situation there.
So that's what it was for. You can see probably why it didn't catch on. Anyway, Birley Hay, in the meantime, is demanding maintenance and repair. The tilt hammer shaft failed in 1899, had to be dragged out and worked on. Deep shuttle in 1929 had problems, and everybody had to come out and try and drag pieces of stone weighing probably 1/4 of a ton into places where they needed to be. The pen trough, which is that feeds over the water wheel, 1930. You can see the sort of, you don't do this sort of job lightly. You've got to take half the roof off. You've got to dig down very deep here. And this chap, though you may not be able to see him, he's looking shattered actually. So not an easy job at all. Maintenance costs are rising. There's a proposed move in 39 to a more efficient steam-powered unit at Phoenix Works. It's preempted by failure of the water wheel axle shaft. So Birley Hay closes. And this is Birley Hay today, a very desirable residence. You can see part of the building still across the road there. The forge in general is not there at all. Well, Phoenix Works continues through the mid-20th century and beyond. Mr. Peter Clegg takes over from, he was a nephew of Mr. Gilbert. You know Mr. Clegg, you know he was a major in World War II, and you know he was awarded the Military Cross twice for active service at Ireland and Allenby. He was just the person to take over the Phoenix Works, because of course it was a time when things were getting more and more difficult. Scythe and Sickles were not being needed quite so much, but he did his best, and he did it really to keep people in work. And a leaflet featuring James Fisher was produced to provide professional advice on the use of the scythe. It was sent out with all the products to show how to fit it, how to sharpen it, and how to use it. And it's still in use today on the Scythe Cymru website. Scythe Cymru are people in Wales who specialise in scythe masterclass courses and so on. They found the history website and requested a copy of this, because they said one of the best bits of the Phoenix Works article is a small instructional leaflet that was sent out with blades from the factory. What is fascinating about the leaflet is how similar it is to what we are doing and teaching now, which is nice to know. Well, we're shipping products here now to places all around the world, and here you can see the stencils that were used with Cape Town on, places like in Australia and so on. Orders in 75, there were still 20,000 at a time, going to South Africa, who apparently wouldn't buy anything else, Ceylon, India, Malawi, and South America. 1988, the Phoenix Works closed. It was the only remaining Scythe and Sickle works in the UK. And that should have been the end. But in 2016, we were approached by Jim again. And Jim was inspired by the history website and the Moss Valley to write songs and music about the area. And one of these is titled The Phoenix Works, and it appears as a music video on YouTube. So you need to go and listen to YouTube. No, we can do better than that, because Jim's here tonight. So perhaps we'll be able to persuade him to sing The Phoenix Works. And all I want to do now is just leave this acknowledgement of the many people involved in the production.